Yes. Yes, thank you for the invitation. I'm going to speak about how to engage men by looking into some of the gender inequalities there are for men. Maybe not because there is discrimination, but just because there are inequalities. And I'm going to talk about it in 3 areas: public health, education, and parenthood, which I think are one of the main areas we should look into when it comes to men's inequality for men. We all know how men are, and men has been in this position for several years, and we know that's what we are fighting against. We have this guy here who's done the way of the homework, who's taking part of it. But when it comes to health, you'll find out that this guy, he lives 7 years longer, shorter than his wife. And that's how it is when you look around the world. You'll see that in the countries where there is most suppression of women, there is the biggest difference in life expectancy, where women has the longest lives the longest time. And when you look at the global development right now, you'll see there is an increase in the difference in men's and women's life expectancies. So for the past 35 years, the difference has grown with 30%. So there is a big change in the world where women gains life expectancy faster than men do. And that's not only because of birth-related deaths. When you look at the life expectancy at 50 years, it still is growing with 30% over those years. So it's very important to find out why is it going like this for men and women. And when we look into Europe, see there are differences among men in Europe. Iceland always wins, one of the most equal countries in the world. There's also the smallest difference in life expectancy. So Iceland will win this time. We hope to meet you in the final in the World Soccer. But in the poor countries, the differences are growing. So the poorer country there is, the bigger is the difference in life expectancy between men and women. So there are differences among men, but there are also differences between men and women, and the differences are growing the more poor the countries are. And if you look into Denmark and see how is the development right now, you'll see that the 25% poorest men in Denmark are lagging behind all the other groups. So when you put the social status into the gender perspective, you'll see that the poorest men are lagging behind in life expectancy, so that the difference between the richest men and the poorest men in Denmark over a period from 1987 to 2011 has grown from 6 years to 10 years. While when you look at the women, they are having a parallel movement, so there's 6 years between the richest and the poorest all the time. So what we have is we have one group of men who are lagging behind, and that's not only in Denmark, but around the world and around in all the Nordic countries. So that's a perspective when you want to engage men in gender equality, the gender equality fight. I think it's very important to say there are also gender inequalities related to men's gender. So when you look into the men's mental health, there's also very many areas where men's mental health has not been looked at and not been seen, that many men actually suffer from mental illnesses but are not discovered, not diagnosed, and not in treatment. And that's, for example, depression. Normally we say that double as many women as men suffer from depression. What we know is that half of the men who suffer from depression are not discovered, are not diagnosed, and are not in treatment. Also, when you look into men's perinatal depressions, which is barely recognized around the world. Maybe Denmark, I think, was one of the first countries in the world to recognize this as a fact, that men can get perinatal depressions too. The result is that men commit suicide 3 times as often as women through the lifetime. So what is needed? I think what we need is to have strategies for changing this, strategies for changing the men's higher mortality in all diseases, strategies for recognizing the mental illnesses in men, and strategies for reaching out to men. I think if we should wait for men to change, it will take very many years in health psychology and health behavior. But what is possible to do is to reach out and find new ways to reach men and give them better health and lower mortalities. So where are the men and women moving? When we look into education these years, you know, women get more education than men, and this makes big changes in, for example, the Nordic countries. If you look at this map, you'll see in the dark blue areas, there are up to 10% more men than women living there. If you look into the red areas, I have put some arrows on just to find where the women are. The women are the majority in these areas because they get education and they get jobs related to their higher education. So we have a difference in Denmark, in all the Nordic countries, where men are in the majority in the rural areas, where women are becoming the majority in the big cities in the countries. So this is related to education, this is related to health, and this is related to demographics. So that is, and I think this is changing more and more and growing this thing. And this leads to that we are having a society of very many people living a single life. In Denmark, it is so that 45% of all the unskilled workers will live a single life all of their life. And what does it mean to live a single life? Yes, it means that men who are single will live 7 years, have a 7 years shorter life expectancy than men who live together with other people. When I started studying, I was afraid first that it was a good thing for women to be single, but fortunately it's not. But it only costs half of the lifetime expectancy for women. So what does that mean? We just had a new research here in Denmark showing that up to 25% of all men in Denmark will never be fathers. And it's 45%, or 35% of all unskilled male workers will never have a family, will never be fathers. So this is, and has an impact on health, this has an impact on mental health, this has an impact on how you enjoy your life. So this is a very big imbalance, which I think is important to look into. So a lot of thing about this is about education, and when you look for the Danish figures, you see that 44% more women than men get a higher education. And this is a total revolution of through just 30 years or something like that. Women have seen that education is thing that makes liberation, that makes you strong in the world. What projects should men have? Unfortunately, it's so that a lot of men in our schools in Denmark, young men, do not get an education, drops out of education. Much more men drop out of education in our country. And we have a whole lot of young men without education, without only scarce jobs, and with low self-esteem, with bad mental thrives. So the other revolution we have is men are becoming fathers, actually. And what do we know about fathers through our history, and what do we know about in culture? Actually, you know, when you look into the European mythology and history, fathers have been very strange. Uranus puts his children back into his mother. Kronos swallowed his children. Zeus had 15 illegitimate children. Odysseus said, you know, like men do, I'm just going to get something, and he came back 20 years ago, 20 years after. And you know, Abraham were ready to sacrifice. He was stopped. His son, he was stopped. Agamemnon, who wanted to fight at Troy, he actually offered his daughter to get some wind to go to Troy. So now in our new days, you know, fathers have been coming up, and we are going to meet fathers getting close to their children. This is one of the first ones. And then there was a big change, you know. For the first time in a mainstream culture, we had a movie telling that a man could actually have a closer relationship with his child than the mother had. This was revolutionary. You had never seen anything like that in the whole human history. And then, you know, there has been a development on how men can actually relate and attach to their children. We have seen a lot of the Swedish ones here. He's still smoking, but he will stop soon, I hope. There were some fathers who were very engaged, but not all of them were as nice as we hoped they would be. So we'll get away from him as soon as possible. But actually, what we have is a father-rich society which we have never seen ever in human history before. Fathers attending births, fathers being together with their babies. We have never seen anything like that. But I think we can help the fathers. And we're talking a lot about parental leave here, which I think is very important. But also the, so to speak, total recognition of men as partners, as parents, on equal terms of women. Better understanding of the psychological transformation of men becoming fathers. And I think what we should recognize is that just as we have seen women go from the home place to the working place through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, maybe we should recognize that men at this time actually is in a movement like this, just in the opposite way. Men coming from the workplace and getting close to their family life, the close relation, being a parent, being together with their children, and surprise, surprise, they meet the same problems, the same things that are different in work-home balance. And I think it's a better way to understand men right now at where are they and what are their problems right now. This is a way also, if you recognize that, to engage men in the fight for gender equality. Thank you.